how we exited directly affected how they implemented peace. Yeah, so okay, so we hit a couple things there. Well, the original point I was making was that because the environment is stagnated and there's only incentive, there's only an incentive to maintain the status quo. They need for an environment where people could do other things than fight each other all day, because you don't want that, right? Because if they actually fought each other, that would destabilize that status quo. Where you're at now is creating that same environment. But the real problem is there's no singularity, there's no single threat anymore, especially if like the geopolitics change and Saudi and Iran start getting along. Guess who else is going to get along with them? Possibly the Qataris, who have been a centerpiece of mediation, right, in that area. They have great level. They're like the Switzerland of the area, despite the fact that our presence are there, which I think is just a tribute to the Qataris, to be honest. Um, in that sense, because that's a feat. That's a feat all on its own to maintain a balanced relationship with all parties in a way that look, when we talk about the Trump era, I was so ecstatic at one point because as the Taliban were in Qatar and they were negotiating the peace. Like what they understood that, look, Americans are going to leave. We're going to be in charge. Like, this is going to happen because it's going to happen.
That
But
that wasn't the agreement.
well, but it's going to happen in a parliamentary type of setting,
That's what ultimately came about. But
right?
it was supposed to be a conditions-based withdrawal that they
Yeah.
never met the conditions of.
Oh yeah. No, the execution of that was garbage. I'm saying before that, when when there was no when they stopped fighting, right?
Well, they
When
stopped
the
attacking the U.S.
yeah they stopped
They stopped attacking U.S. service members.
right, and that was part of the like, oh, this guy's serious.
Yeah.
We're going to negotiate an exit plan here, and we'll stop killing them. They'll stop killing us. We'll figure out what normal looks like. We understand that America could drop a bomb on my face on the other side of the planet at any time. Like we have the ultimate hostage gun, right? We don't even have to be in proximity to threaten you. Like we will get you. Give me 24 hours. Like,
You
like you're
cannot
fucked.
run far enough away.
You could not run far enough away. And I think that was like fundamentally understood by this point,
Mhm.
you know? And so we didn't have to be present anymore because we have that. And we're like, okay, here's the deal. If you're going to do this, then there needs to be like some a, s- a way that is more 22nd century, right? You got to talk about women's rights. You got to be a player in the world type of thing. You can't be isolationist. You gotta connect, right? To in your idea of what your world's going to look like internally needs to be able to mesh with economically with your people and with people around you, so you have a thriving economy. Like you got to do this. You can't just go like you did back in the 80s. You can't do that. You do that, we'll be back. And at the time, like even in Qatar, because I was in Qatar when those things were being signed, and peace in the Middle East type of thing was actually happening. Like it was, I was so excited, but that's not okay. We'll talk about propaganda, what was happening on CNN, and all that shit. It was the opposite view. But what was actually happening was the potential for this to happen. And of course, at the end of the day, the execution of that, I almost feel was malicious
On whose part?
on our part. Like we did,
And executing what?
like the actual withdrawal, the actual um conditions arrangement of how we're going to how that transition is going to happen, what the what the placement was going to be, because it wasn't, the job wasn't to like evaporate in the middle of the night. That wasn't the plan. The
That
plan was
wasn't
to,
that wasn't the Trump administration's plan.
right, that's what I'm saying. That was, but that was also part of the piece. Like how we exited directly affected how they implemented peace. By evaporating, we just created a power vacuum again. And the plan started, but then at the end of the day, the Taliban were like, "Oh, wait, never mind. You guys aren't doing anything. You're not even here anymore."
The
Check.
entire time I was looking at the problem set out here, the Taliban were never not uh, progressing. The Taliban were never not making forward progress against the Afghans, the Afghan National Security Forces.
Mm-hmm.
Like they were never not moving forward. Like they were getting schwacked when they got within, I don't know, 1,500 meters of any U.S. positions,
Mm-hmm.
but like they never stopped encroaching.
Oh yeah. Those shadow governments. Basically, it was run like the mafia for all intents and purposes.
So I don't think there was ever a point where the Taliban's perspective involved sharing power with the Afghan government that we had established. That was never a part of their decision making calculus. It was just
Mm-hmm.
like, yes, you leave and then you're gone. Like that's what's going to happen. And so I've heard a couple of different perspectives on like what a desirable end state would have looked like. And one of my buddies out here was saying like 2,500 people on the ground would have been enough to maintain our presence here, to maintain the peace that we had established,
Mm-hmm.
the relative peace that we had established. And I don't know, I sort of think that like there was never an acceptable long-term strategy. I think pulling out was the only thing that we should have done. But how it was executed was, like you said, you thought it was malicious.
I do. I think the way it
What makes
happened
you
was
think that?
malicious. So we have history, right? We understand what it looks like. Over 20, and we're talking about recent history. We're not even talking about like 50s or the 60s or 30s or whatever. No, we're talking about like in our like living lifetime of actually doing things.
Mhm.
We know what it looks like if we just disappear after we've had such a strong influence on the area for so long. We know what that looks like. And so if the idea, right, again, and then I think this is one of the few times where I think a human was actually involved in this process. Because if the idea was to create a stable Afghan with a modern version of Taliban philosophy, look, there's nothing wrong with the Taliban philosophy. Look, drive your avatar the way you want, whatever. We accepted it before BT dub, right? We had no issues with the Taliban prior to 9/11, and really we only had issues with Taliban because Osama was hanging out there. That was it. So like let's not get heartbroken over like we feel bad that the Taliban's in power. That's not even close to any truth. But there was a structure designed so that and agreed upon that, hey, fine, we'll do Taliban, but we'll make it 2022 Taliban. Not there was no, the structure was set.
There's no 2022 Taliban.
Well, so here's the problem. Look, because you got to remember, the Taliban we're dealing with today are not the 1980s guys. Those are their fathers and grandfathers.
Sure.
Right? So we're talking about us. It's our generation. They're 40s. They're in their 40s today. So it's us. It's not our parents there anymore, right? And so from their perspective, look, they like cell phones. They like modern equipment,
Mhm.
right? Their grandfather's sheep herders. They're not. That makes sense, right? You know what I mean? Like they're not looking to they want power, yes, right? They want governmental control and they want to be able to um strengthen their environment type of thing. But they were willing to go, okay, look, I get it. I am not my father. And so we'll talk about women's rights. What did my father believe? Okay. My grandfather, father believed that you couldn't even look at their face and blah, blah, blah. Look, I was brought up on that. I get it. Uh, but, having more than 50% of my people uneducated is really silly idea in today's world. Like we won't last because they know they don't have anything. Like, what do you got? You got nothing. Got a bunch of rock. Some of
And
that rock's worth money, Afghanistan, but some of that rock is worth money. But the problem is that you don't have anything to get that rock out,
Chinese.
right? Well, now it's the Chinese. In the beginning, it wasn't going to be the Chinese.
It's been the Chinese for decades. Like the Chinese have been in Afghanistan extracting mineral
Yeah.
resources since like 2006. Like companies, Chinese companies
Mhm.
pulling stuff out since then. Like that has always been happening.
And you
And with
wonder
the
how
US
well, you
not
wonder how
there,
the
happening.
Taliban got right to keep things going when even know, right? So I'm
Pakistan
sure there
helped a
was
little, I'm sure.
something happening in the background because how do these companies get in and out of Afghanistan without any issues and we get shot out every day, right?
Grease the
Uh
skids. You got to pay
huh?
the right people.
Yeah,
You got
pay
to
the right people.
WASTA. You have to have WASTA.
Lost. And so what I'm saying is like when we pulled out though, it was like it didn't have I mean, yes, of course. You don't want the foot soldier on the ground somewhere if they're not fighting a war. Straight up. That's not what this is designed for. But you don't have to evaporate. Like
Yeah.
you could take your time, in doing it in a way that makes sense to everybody.
Orderly withdrawal. I
Orderly
think
withdrawal,
it was
right?
advertised as.
Yeah, you can drive the equipment to the shoreline, you know. You can or you can remodify them over time and sell them to the Taliban instead of just leaving or gift it to them, whatever. But you can modify that stuff and make sure you get the key components off and you could do
So
things over time that makes sense.